Okay.
Oh, they're being recorded.
Filip is recording the call. So this is our first, should we say the date and
Chapter's long. January 13th.
2022. So for anyone watching this in the future, yeah, Triad truth model. Did you want me to just talk about it, or did you?
Sure. Yeah, because just remind me, you were trying to combine, because there was a 2,000-word essay and then the.
Yeah, so I have 2 philosophy courses, and I'm hoping for both of them I have to write an essay, and the topic is you can choose any topic. So I hope to include this somewhere, because I feel like I need to develop it on paper. I need to write about it. I actually discovered that a philosopher from 1200 had a similar perspective. He talks about double truth. Mm-hmm. So if there's a contradiction between a truth, faith, and a scientific truth, then you can hold both to be true, because one is true for your faith and one is true for. And that was philosophy in 1200. So it pops up everywhere now. Okay. Yeah, how are we linking it to our previous conversation, or should I just
truth triad? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, what the link was, that you can hold a formal truth, formal framework, and then what you kind of instinctively live by.
Yeah, so you were saying you're less interested in someone's formal framework, you're more interested in what they
actually live.
Yeah. So yeah, so the Triad truth model is it's basically says there's three ways of approaching truth. So there's the scientific way of approaching truth, which is rational and objective. So we look at laws of nature and things that are universal and repeatable and measurable, and even logical. Like I would put mathematics in there. Then there's relational truth, which is not quite scientific truth, because saying I love you is in some way maybe reducible to a chemical process, but that's not the entire story, right? You can't make a robot and put that chemical process in there and then that robot loves you. Well, that's a complex conversation, because in order for them to have that chemical process, they'd have to have a brain and a heart and basically be a human. So they're not a robot. So it's an impossible question. But
they need a soul, right?
Well, that's the question. So
actually, I have some new thoughts on that, but go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, relational truth is just any. I haven't got a nice definition of it yet. So that's one thing I hope to work out. So it's anything that you say about an interaction between two people. And then, so that can both be approached rationally, but also emotionally and more phenomenologically. And then there's worldview truth, which my current standing definition is any narrative or story, the truth of which cannot be known. That's when a person believes that story.
Reality of which cannot be sought out.
Yeah. Yeah, the objective truth. Oh yeah, I said objective truth. That's better. Cannot be known. That if a person believes the story, their motivations are influenced by it. So, and then my argument is that all three of these approaches can lead to truth. And that truth is a lot more complex than just in the scientific, what we think scientifically.
Right, because I'm interested in what you knew. Would you say if you follow all these three, it will lead you to truth? Or what'd you say?
Well, there are, follow, use their methods. Yeah, sure. Because the method of worldview truth is faith, for example. Okay. So, you know how I talked to God on the lake?
Right.
So I believe I believe that that's true. Like I truly talked to God, but I wouldn't say scientifically like there is a physical being in another dimension that I talk to. So it's true in the worldview sense, but not in the scientific sense. So it's true, it's actually true, because and what I mean by true then is more pragmatist view of truth, which is, well, it's makes sense of reality. It's the right terminology for your experience. It's the best terminology I can think of too, because it comes back again to the distinction between scientific worldview and worldview truth, because, well, I was on drugs, right, doing the talking to God on the lake. So it can be, in some sense, diminished to a chemical process again, but then again, not quite, because that doesn't. Well, and here's another reason why I think the distinction is useful is that, well, and this is what I've noticed when I was not on drugs and tried to talk to God, is I could do it if I stopped on my rationalizations and all my rational arguments against God. There were a couple times where I actually like really strongly felt God's presence when I consciously did that. So my point would be, I can only if I believe, like the power of faith, basically. If I believe what I believe about it scientifically, then I do not get the same reality, right? Because if I'm in that thing with God, but then I think like, actually,
the same subjective experience of reality, and your subjective experience of reality is the only experience of reality you have. So it's to you, it's effectively altering reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also altering my decisions and like so it's also altering objective reality, like what I do. Like because
no, I get what you mean.
I wouldn't kneel in the square if I didn't.
It's affecting something outside of your subjective experiencing it as well. It's also affecting actual tangible things in the world.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what faith always does, right?
Again.
Yeah, so that's the Triad truth model. I'm still working out whether relational truth, because a lot of philosophers, this comes back in a lot of philosophers like David Hume makes a distinction between moral truth and philosophical truth, basically. Pearson between the world of action and the world of objects, and there's a lot of philosophers that make this thing. So I'm still, but Jürgen Habermas, for example, he does make a triad distinction. So nature, culture, introspection. So that would be similar to mine. But I'm still figuring out whether relational truth falls under worldview truth.
Yeah, well, because I'm interested. Yeah, because something comes to my mind is within a relationship. So within a romantic relationship, none of us have been married, but like apparently there comes a point, and I've experienced this in other kinds of relationships, but where you choose to love someone, even though you don't feel it. And I'm curious where that would like fit in, because it's not like my experience of the world necessarily is that I love this person, but still I do. And again, that affects both my subjective experience and the objective, as you say. It will influence my actions towards them.
Yeah, and that sounds more like a worldview truth, right? You choose to believe something actively about. Yeah. Whereas I would say relational truth is more like something present in the relationship. So not something that you have to because the definition of a worldview, that's why I don't think they overlap. Yeah, because the truth is not known. The truth is unknowable, right? It's a story or narrative, the truth of which cannot be known. That, if you believe it, affects your motivation. But like I can know that you love me, I would say. So that's why I don't think it falls on the worldview truth. That's where the thing.
I could be manipulating you these years.
Yeah. So and yeah. So, but you can say like reason, like in Bayesian terms, you can say pretty recently that someone loves you.
It's statistically unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. Will that do? Is that?
Yeah, sure. But yeah, we're still lingering on the relational truth, the truthfulness of relational truth. But I would also want to dig into like what truth means in this context. It seems to mean something like having an effect on reality. Or so either having an effect on your subjective experience of reality or having an effect on your actions. And that's
I would put it more, but that's definitely inherently in there. I would put it more in the sense of it's a proper description of reality.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
But then the pragmatism, and that's why when I talk about this, I intuitively feel like worldview truth is a higher truth or a better or more solid truth than scientific truth, because it's more influenced by the pragmatist conception of truth. Science is too objective. And it's not about anything that really concerns us. Well, it's about a lot of things that concern us, but
it's too objective in that it's not subjective enough.
Yeah, it's always outside of the human
account
experience.
For the subjective.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole portion of reality, this is what I became interested in when I learned about phenomenology.
Right.
At my philosophy studies. Well, there's a whole part to reality that we don't address in materialist worldview. It's the phenomenological experience of human beings, the subjective, how we view the world and perceive it and live in it. And worldview truth addresses that. So that's.
How do you then view delusions? Like people who, schizophrenics or like, let's have one concrete example. We can, I don't know. I want to do something non-controversial, but I'm thinking about those people that feel like they should be paraplegic, like feel like they shouldn't have legs. It's but yeah. Or like, they have voices in their head telling them to kill someone. Like, is that? I mean, obviously that isn't good, right? And it's in some sense real, but it seemed, or I feel like I've picked up in like clinical advice that you shouldn't affirm someone's delusions, sense of paranoia or something. That's negative to affirm their subjective experience is real.
Yeah. Well, so I have a couple of thoughts on this. So first of all, I think it's an interesting question because it strongly relates to the chemical foundation of our subjective experience.
Okay.
Right? Because schizophrenic patients can take medicine and not have as much schizophrenia. So it's an interesting thing of like our brain is just an interpretive system, and if there's a malfunction in there, then your whole reality changes. And that's just what happens when you do drugs. So that's why I made the argument a while back, like we could have developed to always be in a psychedelic state. Our brains could have developed in that direction, and that would have been reality.
More truthful is the question, or is it more delusional?
So that's So that's why I think it's an interesting question. I also think another thought I had was that maybe this is why relational truth is interesting to distinguish because well, the reason we say they're delusional is not because we know that we have a more objective or true perspective of the world, but it's because they don't align with how most people perceive the world.
Right, and they aren't productive. They're actually detrimental and harmful.
Well, but productivity is still part of our interpretation of the world.
Sure. We don't perceive it as good to be paranoid.
Yeah, but I don't think we can logically ground that in, saying we have a better perspective of the world.
Right.
I'm not sure if I agree with this, because this kind of goes in the face of pragmatism. Because on pragmatist worldview, you would say that we have a better view of the world because it aids survival better than their worldview. But
which is very materialist all of a sudden.
Yeah, pragmatism can be very materialist. Yeah. But yeah, the delusion thing, yeah. Because the argument you're making is basically, well, if you're saying worldview truth is a higher truth than scientific truth, then, well, these delusional people basically have worldview truths.
Right.
That don't really line up with. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a counter argument to that point. Well, so for a lot of them, they're scientific truths, right? So because the definition of worldview truth is a story, the truth of which cannot be known.
Mm-hmm.
The objective truth of which cannot be known. So that reflects back to scientific truth. So this paraplegic is the word?
Paraplegic, yeah.
Paraplegic. He actually does hold. That's not a worldview truth. That's a scientific truth, right?
Well, no, they believe that they ought to be
without legs.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But that is their realist best self. Like it's a kind of body dysmorphia.
Yeah. Yeah, then it is.
I feel like paranoia is an easier one to take as an example, a case study.
Well, I think this one works as well. It's pointing to like that I do make a distinction. Maybe the answer is just really easy. Like, it's just a pragmatist answer. Like, which worldview works? Oh yeah, I guess that just is my answer. Because that was my reason for saying to my cousin, like, if you're so open-minded, why are you a Christian? Because, well, if you want to know which worldview, oh yeah, my point about you can only truly know how a belief or a story influenced your motivation if you believe it. Right. So if you want to know what's the best worldview, and the best worldview would be that worldview which motivates you in the best direction, then you should try believing them all.
Okay, that's your view on like best and worst in terms of worldviews.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's cool. The easy answer.
Yeah, because that's the leg up you have on me, right? In terms of like discovering truth. So that I've
experienced.
Only kind of vicariously left Christianity. I've only like put myself in the shoes of atheists, Muslims, Mormons. I've never actually walked in those shoes.
Yeah, and
whereas that's been your journey. You've actually left behind, moved into something new, and lived from there. And then, yeah. And
that's something that I did think about when you showed me that post on the BSM alumni, the cowl, or the deconstruction versus deconversion. Like, I think there's a big difference between people who are just deconstructing or who've actually deconverted. who've actually deconverted for a long time, because I think most people deconvert for a little bit.
Okay.
Right, like even my dad.
Deconvert or deconstruct?
No, deconvert. Like most people say goodbye to God for at least maybe a week in their lives.
Oh, sure.
Right, when they're like 18.
Well, I wouldn't call that deconverting. Like I had my experience of that last year, where I was just like, I can't follow you. I'm too tired. This isn't. I'm bitter and I'm resentful. So I'm not gonna like do the Christian life anymore for a while. But I didn't stop believing. I didn't stop thinking he was there. I even like had, a time where I just prayed for a little bit, but then went back again. So like I never stopped believing, even though I turned my back on him. And I feel like many other people have a similar story, even though they go like way further. I just like, didn't care for a while and played a bunch of video games. But other people, they leave their youth group and then they, go out into the world and they sleep around and whatever else. But I feel like a lot of them still say that, they always knew God was there. They never, yeah.
So, no, that's exactly my view as well. Yeah, it's not actual deconversion.
Right, okay.
Yep, but a lot of them, like, they bring it up to me as an argument, right? They say, well, it's just a phase. I went through that phase too. I was an atheist for a while, but then I discovered, well, no, God is real. Like, no, you didn't actually deconvert. Probably if you returned to your formerly held faith, but that's like kind of a strong claim, right?
Yeah, it is, because I'm sure some people did. They're just like, no, God doesn't exist. It can't really be. But then you wonder, is their coming back to God a result of, reactivating those neural pathways? Or is it something entirely new?
Yeah, I think a lot of that hinges on the time span between the deconversion and the reconversion.
So,
because a lot of that neurology, I think, breaks down when you stop believing it. That's also an interesting.
So if you're gone for, is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, where would you like, around where would the cutoff point be?
I think
it's an actual deconversion and reconversion.
Yeah, good question.
Like rebellious phase, a prodigal kind of thing.
Well, I think it depends, because I can see. I think it depends on how you come back into the faith, right? Because what you see with a lot of older Christians, or what I've seen with a couple older Christians, is that they are not as fundamentalist anymore when they're older.
Really?
Well, or they're more concerned with what you say you're concerned with, with just how people act. Like, they're not really concerned with theological. They can like theological discussions, but it's not their primary concern. Their primary concern is their relationship with God and just their subjective experience of that, and then being a good person.
I feel like a lot of older Christians in many different denominations are more concerned with morals. Are you living a moral life than whether you're having religious experiences? Like it seems to, oh well, that's a good boy,
Oh yeah.
Good Christian boy, because they show up to church and they, they're married, and it's like whether they're actually living and breathing Christ is way less of a concern. It feels like.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I meant to say. Yeah, they're more concerned with like reality, what happens in reality, like how people act and whether it's good. But they wouldn't so quickly say like, oh, if you make a bad decision, you were influenced by a demon, or,
Yeah, I think that I know older people who would say that.
So I think so. I mean, if you convert back after 20 years, I mean, so you're probably less likely to fall back into that fundamentalist mindset, but maybe not. I don't know. At least I think, like, to answer the question that you had was, well, where's the cutoff point? To me, I think it depends on how you return to the faith.
Okay.
So it can be anywhere. It can be two years can be the cutoff point for you, if how you return to your faith is completely different than how you left it, basically. Even in terms of your phenomenological experience, like not even necessarily in terms of your beliefs. Yeah. Well, I was kind of confused by something you wrote to me on.
On the post?
No, on Messenger. The conversation that I then...
Right, we have a lot of backlog there, huh?
Yeah, you said we had the Joshua Abdullah.
Right.
Their conversation.
That's the big one we're waiting on, right?
Yeah. And the thing I was confused with, but maybe we can address more in your it was just so much that I didn't find the mental space to respond.
Oh, for sure. And I kept piling on more, like, small things. Hey, look at this funny video.
Right. Oh yeah.
And lockdown protests and whatever else.
Well, the thing I was a bit confused with was when you said, when discussing God, we keep running into the fact that you don't actually think there is such a being.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really good, because that comes, I think, at the core of, like, our objective scientific truth and worldview truth, where those terms, I feel like they clash probably irreconcilably, more so than you see that they're compatible. Does that make sense?
Can you expand on that a bit?
So, for me, what I allow to be a worldview truth is something that I find compatible with science, that they're not contradicting each other. It seems to me like you can allow for science and objective reality tool finding, or objective reality finding tools. Like, science is the only one I can think of right off the bat. And
or
within
perception, right? Just perception.
Yeah, but science is like what we put on our perception to safeguard against falseness, against delusions. Because what'd you say about worldview truth is what caused you to live life better, or like a more true worldview is the one that caused you to live your life the best way?
No, it's well, partly that, but also, like I said, like partly the best description of your reality, a proper description of how you experience the world.
So the one that's most that rings most true for you.
Yeah, although that makes it a little bit too subjective again for me.
Right, that's what I'm.
Yeah. No, it's not what rings more true. It's like one that's actually proper, and there's also some sort of objective part of that, right? It's
Right.
For example,
because that sounds a lot like what I believe. Like, I would say that if, like, I would not reject, but I would place a lot less emphasis on, like, my God encounters if somehow some magical scientific study were able to just like, across the board, this is entirely just made up, imaginated experiences.
Yeah.
They find, commonalities across and a causative thing that's consistent in everyone's past leading up to these experiences. And so it's just, it's just a human thing. It wasn't instigated by some supernatural.
Whereas for me, that doesn't diminish. Yeah, whereas for me, that wouldn't diminish, because that is what I believe.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And so this is like where, so back to the original, what was it I said that you noticed?
Yeah, we keep running into when discussing God, we keep running into the fact that you don't actually think.
I believe it's objectively, scientifically true that there is a being that interacts with me, whether or not I want to instigate or whether or not I, try or put myself in that headspace or activate it by faith. I think there is a separate being directing me, just like you can take initiative towards me. This being can initiate something towards me. Whereas I feel like you're contained within a you.
Yeah, no, because I would agree with everything that you just said, like that you feel like there is a being that's actually interacting with you like we are interacting with each other. Except for me, because, well, it depends on how you define. And see, this is why I get more Petersonian and Pejovian. It's like, what do you mean by being? What do you mean by interact? In this case, what do you mean by
Peterson
God?
Seems to say that he can't exclude the possibility, and seems very to live in such a way that if this being exists, which he suspects, at least that's how I would put it, he suspects that this being exists, and so lives in consciousness of that, where I've only heard you say that being definitely doesn't.
Well, see, again, it's like, what do you mean exactly by that being and it existing?
That to you the being exists insofar as you believe it does.
No. I think it's more outside of that, just purely introspective. Because what I said, it's a worldview truth is the truth that most properly describes reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that if I believe it, then God exists. It's, well, God exists, and if I believe it, that's the proper description of reality. So it is outside of your.
Not a theist.
Well, not in the traditional sense of, well, because this is what theists say is more an objective, a scientific truth about God, which is he is some sort of physical being in another dimension.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that it could be construed that way. Sure.
That's the best terminology I
well, except physical is entirely wrong.
No,
I know how you mean physical. You just mean like tangible.
Physical is in the word metaphysical, right? So.
Yeah, metaphysical means outside the physical world.
Yeah, so physical in another dimension, I think it's just metaphysical. Right? Or I don't know. Maybe it's not.
No, I get what you mean. It's fine.
Yeah. It's the best words we have for that kind of stuff, in my view. So,
well, it used to be
I don't think that. Yeah. Well, so yeah, I don't think, but I don't. But to me, that's such a small view of God.
How is it exclusionary? Isn't it just inclusionary? Like it accounts for one idea of God. How is that small?
Why do you need God to be a being in that's sort of like a has a sort physical dimension somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't he be that through which all things are and through which everything lives, and just like Brahman, like absolute reality, absolute truth, and that with which we interact when we interact with truth and honesty and purity, and which we can actually relate to, and we can actually personify in our mind. Yes, but why do you need that to have? See, to me, it limits it when you make it resemble us as individuals.
Okay. Well, for me, it comes back to I need this being to be autonomous.
Well,
that's the really big thing. It needs to be an actor, not just a an existing texture we can interact with. Like it needs to be.
Well, it does have its own being. Like it does have its own being. That's how Peterson talks, for example, about Christ.
It doesn't seem to, like with the Brahman, it doesn't seem to exist separate from conscious interactors. It wouldn't do anything unless conscious actors engaged with it.
Yes, but that's true of anything, right?
No.
What is that not true of?
Well, it's not true of God.
Well, what would God do if there were no other?
Separate.
But isn't this a theological point? Like what God did before there were other conscious beings was just be. Like he didn't do anything. So this will then create.
Well, we don't know. Maybe he created other things. Maybe just hung out with himself. Like I don't know.
Non-conscious, other non-conscious entities, and he just did. See, it doesn't really make sense to think
similar to me in a sandbox. I would be interacting with it. None of you other people might perceive me doing it, but something would be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that is God on a cosmic scale, or could have been before he made humans. Like that's I need him to be autonomous, to be an actor. That's an essential part of theism to me.
Yeah, so so on my view, he's not an actor. Like he is an actor and he is autonomous. He is the only one that's God, right? So, but he's not, in some sort of sandbox. His own reality interacts with non-conscious material, or like things, until he creates other consciousness. No, because that's see, that makes him too human again, and I think that comes back to one of my main arguments.
Humans are more godly. Like I think most philosophers would agree that the concept of the Imago Dei is to be a creator, to be conscious, to be an actor. So it's not like I guess that's an argument which carries some weight that we're humanizing God by demanding that but the other side just means conceptifying God. Like speaking of pantheism, Brahman, it's just like I feel like you're reducing God away from what's essential when speaking about a being, which is that he initiates interaction.
Well, and he does initiate interaction, but not in a like he is sitting on a throne somewhere and thinking about, well, now I'm gonna do this. It's more of a Although that might be the best description we can get of it. Because I was thinking, we do personify God in our minds, right? So that's what I do when I relate to God. Is why he becomes a being like that.
Mm-hmm.
So for us humans to relate to God, that's a really useful way of doing it. That's how we've always done it. That's how all the other religions do it as well. The polytheisms, they all personify the godly, the divine. But yeah, if he's actually because this is what I was gonna say. One of my main arguments when I became an atheist was, well, if God already has everything is contained in him, he doesn't need anything. Why does he do anything? How can he be motivated to do anything if he literally already is and has everything?
Yeah.
And I think, well, the answer to that was, well, he doesn't have limitation. That's the only thing he lacks. So he makes humans who are limited. And I think when we talk about God in a sort of sandbox interacting with things before he creates other consciousnesses, that sort of limits him. It makes him that delimited being that we humans are, which is exactly what he is not.
How does my sandbox example mean that he's limited?
Because he is bordered, right? He's interacting with things outside himself.
Well, you could, in my example, I mean, he could completely create a skyscraper out of nothing. He doesn't need to make from the sand something. I'm just saying that he interacts with non-conscious things, which he could create ex nihilo from nothing.
Yeah, but they would be outside of himself, right? If he interacts with them like I can interact with you because you're outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
You're separate from. We are delimited by a lot of things. That's Sharista. That's not my conception of God. And that's not the Christian conception of God. Christian conception of God is, well, we all live and have our being in him, through him, all that kind of stuff. It is almost
whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out what that means, because that seems to make, well, a lot more sense in how I experience God, right? And how I see everything. So, for example, well, that was the Abdullah's point. Was, well, maybe he allows for all these different interpretations because the mystery is his exact nature cannot be known. So all these interpretations are fine because the most important thing about knowing God is that you know God.
That you're searching.
Yeah.
Is that you're trying to figure it out. Right, that was his point.
Yeah. And so if you and I come to contradictory conclusions about God, that's not a problem. Right? As long as it's subjective, it's a subjectively true way of relating to God, right? It's your best description of reality.
I can follow along with that as long as we end up still judging one another on the basis of well, are we living better because of it? Not, man, that sounds flaky. In the sense that well, is the fruit of your life consistent with someone who actually has the Spirit of God inside of you?
Yeah, and I think you would then sort of want to move towards a hierarchy of beliefs. So yes. One is better, but would you be fine with maybe saying that there is a landscape of beliefs like Harris's moral landscape where there's multiple peaks? So some Islamic mystic, some Sufist could have as much truth as a Christian.
I think that you can, in your pursuit of God, you can reach. So I do think there is an objective truth about God, probably several objective truths about God, But yeah, like you say and Abdullah said, like it's it's hard to prove which ones are the objectively true ones.
It's not impossible, right?
Yeah, sure. But so I think in our pursuit of trying to figure it out, we have a subjective sense of this. This feels true. This seems true. This seems to align with what I believe, based on your, if you have extensive biblical knowledge, that's gonna guide. But or you might have a certain theological perspective, which will separately guide. And you were brought up a certain way, and that's going to guide which attributes you'll. But then, as you engage with reality as well, you have this. By just the responses you receive from your surroundings, you'll have a certain. That will also guide you. You have positive interactions, and some it's slightly. Or someone behaves in a way that you find offensive, and you'll kind of shy away from that mode of being, probably. Or maybe there was something that scared you about it, but then you also found that it was good, and so maybe that's a stronger emphasis. Kind of like I've started becoming so judgmental and sharp, or like at least I'm on that journey. So I think that sure, we can call it a landscape, but it's a landscape of all the different attributes of God, or that could potentially be God. And I think you can traverse up towards a peak. This is actually from a Richard Dawkins description of like how evolution works, which is interesting. But like, you may see some utility in being very sharp and direct with people. And that might, depending on how strong your convictions are on that might hinder you from realizing the value of humility, which is like a higher peak, a more core defining. This all gets really heretical, but I don't care. But like, you can't be like God. You can't get to know him if you don't know humility. And so in your pursuit of God, I think you can, well, you're definitely above ground, but you might get, encounter a ceiling of your pursuit of God because you hold on to one attribute too closely. And you get, ideological around certain things. So in that sense, there's like different peaks of getting to know God. But, and here's the big thing, you need the Holy Spirit to guide you into all truth. Like, your subjective sense of right and wrong isn't good enough. It's certainly potent and is like an aspect. Actually, I've been listening to some Mike Mashiro things, which are really, which brings in this thing of subjective, of like, this doesn't sit right with me, and sort of allowing that to have a voice, even in the midst of like a theologically, environment. And that's also where I kind of come in with the whole, Romans 14, some people have certain convictions, and we have, like, God has different standards that he's calling us to individually.
Yeah.
For some who are puffed up in spiritual pride and God wants to grow us, or Holy Spirit wants to take us into knowing God, he won't say, hey, you need to fast, because that would be detrimental to the growth journey he wants to take you on.
Yeah.
But
so you're basically still arguing for a hierarchical, but just people have ceilings on their, like how high they can go up in the hierarchy, basically. But there is one person basically who has.
I'm trying to, I'm definitely being ideological here, because I'm trying to avoid, this relativistic, it's just the subjective, and if we just listen to our hearts, we'll be, well on our pursuit of God, because I think our hearts can be deceitful. I think we can.
No, I agree with your
yeah
point about the Holy Spirit, because holy means separated,
right.
separate.
But I can see how my concept of Holy Spirit can be like Socrates' daemon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I think, and that's, I also want to pull in more Mike Machero. He says, he puts like, there's 5 different or 6 different levels of belief. And he's like, there's the atheist, and then there's but he says that he thinks a lot of Christians don't have a relationship with God, but a relationship with their conscience. And that's sort of the distinction I want to make here, because I would say that that's what Socrates maybe had. He was like, he knew like instinctively like what he wanted to do, what was more true for him. And actually just yesterday, I was on the bus, and I thought I recognized this girl sitting a few rows back, and I was just like going back and forth with myself of like, do I say hi and have a short conversation? Well, that would be awkward, and it's stepping over a bit of a threshold of uncomfortableness, because obviously the most comfortable thing is to sit there. But what made me eventually go, and first I was like, well, if we go off at the same bus stop, then but not too far later, like basically everyone in our section of the bus left. I was like, that's sufficient. And it wasn't very clear. It was not God or any, I won't attribute this to God at all, the fact that I went and said hi, but rather I felt it was more in line with me, more in line with who I am and who I want to be and the kind of stuff I want to do. Because my concept of a good world includes people giving out compliments when they seem relevant and engaging their fellow man in non-essential ways just to like foster connection. But then there are other times where I feel not my conscience, not my this is a good thing to do, but like a counterintuitive do this thing, and an accompanying sense of like holiness or something extra.
That it was kind of Socrates' daemon, right? Because he knew he was going to be killed, and everyone was recommending him to flee, but his daemon was saying the counterintuitive thing of staying and dying, basically.
Well, my consciousness could have said that too.
So I think here the worldview truth is like relevant. So I think there's a lot to the Mike Machero point. To me, they're the same thing, the consciousness and like scientifically speaking, the consciousness and the God thing. But worldview makes the difference.
I think that's where we maybe depart.
Yeah, that is where we depart. Because, for me, the worldview truth makes the difference. So, and because it is like how you were describing it there, with the girl, it was a conscious consideration, and you had these arguments, and then you just like no, now I'm gonna do it, and that there was no God involved. Because, what if you were sitting there and you didn't even notice the girl, but all of a sudden the voice in your head said, well, look over there, there's a girl, go give her a compliment. Then it would be God, right? So the only difference for me there is the story.
Okay.
So in the first one, the story is you already see the girl, you're going through the conscious consideration. In the second one, the story is, oh, it's just a random thought. And then you see it, and then the random thought, and that motivates you.
Okay.
So saying God is the proper description there, yeah, because, where does that random thought come?
There was, or an assumption of an unfolding narrative, or like plugging into a grand story being told.
And it's a very good narrative, right?
Sure.
Makes a lot of sense. And believing that narrative, like if if you got that voice and you saw the girl and then you chose to believe, oh no, this is not God, I'm just going to discard it, then you would not have talked to the girl. So it's also a good narrative because you believed it was God, then you talk to the girl. Right? So like believing anything other than this is God, would not have been as productive. So
well, if
you could think of some other worldviews maybe, but
I'm just saying that the actual situation, I did talk to her even though I didn't have a narrative.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Except kind of the narrative of like me influencing the world towards something better. But it obviously isn't like a story. It's not, the tales of It was a one-off thing with no expectation of a continuation of it or anything.
Yeah. No, I think that would fall under relational truth, maybe how you want to influence people. Yeah, I have to think about that more.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But I think because weren't you making an argument? Weren't we talking about whether God is an actually like physical, sort of like an instantiated, delimited being, as opposed to just
not
like
limited. Not limited being.
Yeah, delimited.
Okay. What does that mean?
Just that it has that it's separate from things outside of itself. You can delimit the being. I think that's the right word, right? Delimit?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the right word.
I'm amazed at our vocabulary and just like illusions, by the way. Or like, oh yeah, and Brahman and
yeah, that one's not a lot of Europeans.
Bayesian thinking, right? I feel so important.
So educated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we parse this out further? Your God belief and my God belief, or are we getting bedrock?
I just feel like you see objective truth and worldview truth as like different axes, different categories of truth. And I try and intertwine them more.
Yeah, although I guess I'm also doing that, right? I just think the objective world, the objective truth covers so little of the human experience. So I think they like intertwine, overlap, all that. But worldview truth adds just the whole subjective experience to the story. Because
Well, I just had an image now that might, because you being all phenomenological, those are the better thing to do, right? I saw like the objective picture of reality is like, it's a coloring book. And so it's just like, okay, this is how things work. You have cognitive psychology and you have all sorts of like, okay, well, this is what actually happens in your brain and these hormones interact with that. And that's what joy is. That's what love is. It's gray, but it like describes things. And then subjective experience is the coming alive of these things with color, with impression. And so the subjective the subjective is exactly that. It's subjective. You can't ever put, I don't even know if I believe that, but like you can't put language to it because it's always I don't know, one of my favorite anime quotes is it's this villain who like wants to basically put everyone in the world under collective hypnosis where they get to live their dream lives. And his motivation is that we can never show our guts to one another. We can never truly make someone understand the other. Therefore, there will always be suffering and strife and war and whatever. And exactly that, like the colors we put to these things are so innately our own and impossible to generalize, impossible to come up with universal language for in a truly satisfactory way. We can like I can tell you as precisely and accurately as I'm able to. I can tell you how I'm feeling about a certain situation or something, and that can help you empathize, especially since we know each other so well. It can help you empathize in the sense that it can, maybe certain words I say can trigger certain emotions in you that you recognize. And so you effectively assume what I'm feeling based on how I'm describing it being similar to how you would describe it. So if I say it's like a dark cloud hanging over my head, I have a specific, or maybe not very specific, but like I'm referring to an experience I'm having. And you, based on your history with that term, maybe you heard it from your parents or growing up or some sort of thought leader, and then you've tried using it yourself. But having a dark cloud over your head only means to you what you put it to mean. And maybe ours are different. Maybe what we truly mean when we say those words are different. So you can empathize with me, but never accurately. The objective reality, the coloring book, is the framework in which our subjective reality arises. And I don't think worldview truth is definable in that sense. I can try and define my worldview truth to you, but even when you think you understand, you won't. So in that sense, I don't know that the objective truth, the objective scientific truth, needs a formal subjective component, because like the objective component being the same for all of us, that's as far as we can reach a description of reality. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, trying to think it through.
Like we can't, even when we add a narrative to this, it's only creating empathy, not real understanding. Not true, like I feel what you feel, I know what it is.
Yeah, well, the question is, does the objective truth provide a real? Because you're saying it's as close as we get, but aren't we kind of overestimating the power of science? I don't want to pull in quantum theory, but I kind of do. Like, well, we don't really know.
In all scientific thought is doubt, right?
Yes, and being underheaved to change. So and just also the fact that like fundamental reality we don't know, like neurocognitive science is not that interesting. Well, it is very interesting, but it doesn't inform us exactly.
Well, it doesn't inform us of what the subjective reality is.
But not even objective reality.
No, subjective, I meant.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't inform us of what the subjective, actual lived experience is, even though you can plot things out on a brain chart.
But it doesn't even inform us about the objective reality, really, because we can't. Bijvoorbeeld, for example, that's the Dutch for example. We don't know what any of the neurons do exactly, and we don't understand any of the interactions, and the chance that we'll ever understand any of that is very small. Goes way beyond our understanding, and maybe we're not even on the right consciousness level to ever understand that, right?
What do you mean understand it? I mean, we can use the knowledge we have to predict future experiments. That's in a very meaningful sense understanding reality, right? Like it's being able to manipulate reality effectively, but maybe not fundamentally understanding it, if that's what you're.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So I don't.
So it's still within
understand an atom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I can describe its behavior to, satisfactory degree.
Yeah, but what really is the use of, like, what is that really what reality is? A description of these. Yeah. See, I think it's very low level truth, because you were saying that's as close as we get to true understanding of reality. But let's say no, it doesn't really tell us anything. We're just describing what we on this level perceive.
I agree that it's a low level truth, in that it doesn't matter much.
Well, it's also not. It's also just through our perceptions, right? What we, with our consciousness, are able to perceive. But it's Kant's idea of we cannot know the nomological world.
Okay, that's like the Ding an sich thing in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see the atom, but we don't know. Still don't know whether we're not in the matrix. So this objective perception of the world, this scientific approach, it claims to be able to do more than it's actually able to do, I think, or than you're claiming.
Well, we also need to say it has accomplished incredible things.
Yeah, no, totally.
And even on a relational science, in actually discovering tools and mechanisms of communication and relationships, that is.
Although those are also subjective.
Sure, they're effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but those would fall for me in the subjective, not necessarily in the objective scientific. Because they're stories. Yeah, that's what I always notice when we study psychology. We invent terms and definitions to, they're proper descriptions of reality. They're basically worldview truths. But they're a lot more universal than what we've been able to come up with in religion, for example. So that's why we think of them as scientific. But they're still worldview truths.
Why do we deem them scientific?
Well, because we've done because they're sort of more universal, like personality, the Hexaco model. It's a universal model. It works everywhere.
Yeah.
There's the same results everywhere, the same differences between people. But it's still not something in itself. It's still a tool that we invented.
Yeah, it's a scaffold that we've put up.
Yeah, to explain reality. It's a proper, terminology for reality. But so that doesn't separate for me from God beliefs. Yeah, because your point was, well,
I want to parse out what is me subjectively seeming to experience an outside force and what is me experiencing an outside force. That is really important to me. Like what, because it's, to me, it's the difference between a delusion and an objective truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like if someone creates an emotional atmosphere, like do you remember that in second year when Gabe came up after our like encounter day? And he was like,
yeah,
"Oh, you guys probably hate me for cutting that day short or something." But these guys can like make that happen.
yeah.
And there was just like uncertainty in the room, like, but wasn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, I just freaking Gabe, but he would like actually put words to that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But so I'm like, okay, I can be manipulated into perceiving something that isn't actually happening. It's like I can start believing in my paranoia, but it wouldn't lead to anything. But if I believe in a God who heals under certain circumstances, the thing will actually happen. If I believe in the message I received right now about talking to that person, something would actually result from it that was miraculous, that wouldn't have happened in my mere human capabilities.
Yeah, but so yeah, to me this is just again the sort of almost arbitrary delimitation of God, because see if God is, if everything is in God, through God, for God,
Mm-hmm.
then the fact that a band on stage with some good sound technicians can create a spiritual atmosphere makes total sense, right? Because God is, immediately there to be experienced under the right circumstances and is the proper description for that experience. Whereas if you're, so yeah, even if, because you want to know, well, but yeah, I don't see how, because that's also coming from outside, right? It's always an interaction.
Sure. But
So
yeah, no, it's coming from outside. That's fair.
yeah, in just the same way that God would be coming from, right? Because God is coming through the music. That would be my, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but in the sense that he wouldn't have come except with the music.
Yeah, but he also could have come without the music. That's fine because everything is in God, through God, for God. And so, like, even if you're not in tune with that or consciously think about it, it can still interact with you because that's the human experience, and that's what happens all the time to people. Like you look at the TV and the microwave and you're watching every day. You look at it, it says 11:11. It's like, what is that? Is that, are you? This kind of synchronicity. But this is a real part of life, right? For everyone. Like, you don't have to be a believer.
Where you see patterns where there aren't necessarily patterns. And you perceiving there to be patterns has an effect on you.
Yeah. Well, and there are patterns, right? If you see it every day for a while. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like you.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, so to me, so I would agree with your language of saying, well, God can interact with us sort of almost voluntarily, like would be like me calling you where you're not expecting it. Like God can do that, but he is not sitting behind his laptop and going to Messenger and like clicking the call button. Like he is that which is always interacting with everyone in some sense.
Okay, you know, so everything is God. There isn't anything that is right.
Yeah, and we use, for example, morality, like the concept of morality, to sort of delimit between God experiences and not God experiences.
How are they not God experiences though?
Well, because that's the better language, right? Okay. It's not like it's not actually God, but
okay, yeah, sure.
This is difficult, man. Yeah. Sort of feel like what I'm saying is running ahead of what I'm able to think about, but yeah.
Well, there's another big distinction, which I briefly touched on, which is I believe in supernatural events. Mm-hmm. I believe in miracles, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do. Good luck with that. Take that to court. No, I'm kidding, but that's still my instinctive response, of course. Like, well, the evidence is scarce.
Although, did you see Elijah's movie?
No.
Okay.
Was it good? Did you see it?
Yeah, it was really good. It was like the best part about it was that it wasn't propaganda. Like he lent a very real
leave
voice.
That up to me to decide. Okay.
Well, obviously every documentary has a bias, and it's impossible to do away with that. But like he went out of his way to let the skeptics outside and within himself have a voice. So like even when they're like, okay, this is the best conclusive evidence we have, he was like actively giving voice to the critics, like saying, well, you can always da 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 and think this way, but you gotta da da da. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, miracles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything new to say on that. Just the things about like how I still don't see how they point to a specific instantiation of a god, and how they're so scarce. And yeah, their scarcity is basically the reason that I don't think they can point to the Christian God, for example. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Should we stop the recording?
Let's talk you later. Yeah, probably, right?